This interview is designed to share the ITLS academic journey with a broad audience through a series of podcasts, as you know, as you have interviewed all of us. And today we turn this around, and in my capacity as Deputy Director of ITLS, I'm delighted and have the great pleasure to welcome you as our Director and founder of ITLS to join me for a fireside chat. So let's start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in the field that has defined your career, and why you choose to found and lead ITLS over the many years.
Thank you, Rico. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. And indeed, 32 years on, it's quite a journey. And trained as an economist, both in Australia and in the UK, and having initially a career I thought was going to be in the monetary policy and economic development. But I met someone called Michael Beasley who described transport economics as a fascinating area and one where good microeconomics could be applied. And I guess that started my journey many, many years ago. And I found it a fascinating area. Very few economists were in the field. And so before I ended up at the University of Sydney, I'd worked both in consultancy as an economist and also in other universities. And it was a great opportunity for me to really understand the challenges of what is a fascinating field, meeting people not just in economics, but in engineering and planning and policy. And what I particularly liked about it was the multidisciplinary flavor and the opportunity to bring good ideas from economics and econometrics into very practical applications that could make a difference. In the late 80s, I guess, I had the opportunity to join the University of Sydney as the Graduate School of Business, as it was in those days, and as a regular professor in the business program. But it wasn't long until a Minister of Transport in those days suggested that maybe planning in terms of data and modelling should be in university and not in government. And my very excited director at the time, Murray Wells, suggested we put in a proposal to actually control and run the household travel survey, and etc. Well, that didn't quite work out for various reasons to do with the union interference, etc. But what it meant was that it was the beginning of a journey which the director suggested that I start in setting up a transport centre. At the time, I wanted to call it the Institute of Transport Studies. He said that was a bit ambitious, but he accepted it. And as you know, then we started building up capability, and not only in terms of research, but also in teaching. Excellent.
Could we move on to chat a little about what areas you have taught over your career, and perhaps also talk a little bit about supervision of higher degree students, so PhD students, over your career?
Yes. In some ways, I like to define my teaching side of things in two areas. One is really the development and teaching of discrete choice methods and stated preference experiments. I think it's fair to say with Jordan Olivier, I've developed the stated choice methodology, but also recognizing that transportation is very broad. And over the years, I've taught just about everything in transportation, from transport policy, transport planning, transport modelling, transport demand management, and so on, and increasingly linking that to the broader issues of freight, not just passenger, which of course has developed the interest of myself and ITLS into logistics and supply chain management, which has a very strong link to distribution, which is a transportation issue of enormous importance through freight in particular. So on all of my teaching really has been the basis of me suggesting important topics and supervising PhDs. I do think that the PhD program, which is very extensive now in ITLS, over 30 students, has been a great success, and something that in the beginning I was very proud of being able to supervise many of the initial PhDs. In fact, the first few I supervised in areas as wide as aviation, demand modeling, maritime, and through to broad policy aspects of transportation. So the teaching shouldn't be seen as just teaching postgraduates, which has been the main focus, but also running and developing and contributing to short courses, which is a very important part of what ITLS does and what I do now with programs delivering to the government agencies and also industry bodies like Bus New South Wales.
Excellent. Now, research is sort of in our DNA and really very much at the center of what we do. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about your current research activity and give us some examples of past research that you are especially proud of?
Yes, thanks, Rico. The current big focus, and partly influenced by COVID, has been the impact that working from home has had on the movement of people and the movement of goods. And so I see that as one of the unintended positive consequences of COVID, and indeed what I will often describe as the greatest transport policy lever we've had to change behaviour in a sustainable and desirable way since the internal combustion engine. So that's a very important area. And the other one is the growing interest as a result of digital technology in ways in which we can offer more integrated transportation services across all the modes. It's known as mobility as a service. And while it has some controversial beginnings and still is a challenge in terms of the business case, nevertheless, we're looking always for ways in which we can improve people's accessibility through improved mobility. Historically, I think the big contributions have been in, if you like, the tools that we use in studying demand, especially choice models and stated preference methods. And in particular, the contribution that I've made to willingness to pay, especially the value of travel time savings. And I'm rather proud of the fact that way back in the 70s, some people in Holland named some of my work through what's called the Hensher equation on the value of business travel time savings. And it still has maintained and survived the test of time as a very rich and rigorous method to put dollar values on intangibles, if you like. But also, more importantly, increasingly, econometrics and choice modeling is very important. But I think the way in which we use psychology and behavioral economics to understand the way people make decisions as the conditioning of the choice outcomes is an area that I've devoted a huge amount of time to. And I think it's fair to say that I was able to introduce very effectively the notion of process heuristics and discrete choice modeling through understanding the way in which people make choices, of which the most popular method is attribute non-attendance, that's now extensively used in many fields, and more recently, notably in health and environmental economics.
Yeah, really impressive. And can we perhaps, as impact is getting more and more important for us academics, can we perhaps spend a little bit more time on, what you think, about the influence that your research has had?
Yes, I think one of the important contributions is through substantial research, you end up asking new questions about things that maybe industry and government have not really thought about. And I think if I could just cite a couple of really, really good examples here. And I think the recent work on working from home would have to be up there. It's made people think about the way in which non-transport initiatives can actually have a huge impact on the performance of the transport system. We know that with working from home becoming non-stigmatized, and today I think we're starting to almost settle down to a hybrid working environment. But I think going forward in the future, it's going to change the way we prioritize the expenditure on infrastructure and the move to what's known as living locally, with a greater focus on active transport. Now, this work is quoted extensively around the world as having an important result in terms of understanding a rethink, if you like, or a reset on how we should be planning our land use and our transport systems going forward in the presence of this major change in the way society would function. I think the other one really is the work I've been doing on the value of travel time savings, which over the years, although clearly many people have been putting dollar values on travel time savings, I've been very keen on extending the methods to really recognize the distinction between congested travel time and free flow travel time, which is related to specific trips, and they have a different value. But also, more importantly, to educate people that travel time reliability is not simply the variation in the travel time on a given trip, but the variation across a number of trips. And so if we want to do a proper cost-benefit analysis of the impact of transport investments, we need to recognize not only what are the time savings broken down by congested and free flow within a trip, but how the travel times can vary over a week, a month, or whatever, as a consequence of changing circumstances. Quite incredibly, as obvious as that may seem, it took some time before that was recognized as important and impactful in evaluating benefits and costs.
Yeah, thank you. So finally, I thought it would be a nice way to finish to get you to speculate through the idea of writing a short postcard on what you think the world will look like in 2042 as it relates to the field of your interest and expertise.
Great question. I've often thought about that. Of course, we know that forecasting, one thing we know at forecast, they're wrong, but which ones are the least wrong? And there's a lot of speculation. But I think that as a result of COVID, and as we slowly come out of it, and I think we're still in it, so thinking about what the next normal might look like, but being also mindful of the links with the challenges in climate change. And then also, I would say, the challenges in what's become known as social equity or mobility equity, is that we are going to start to see a rethink in the way in which people move around, especially in Western societies. And I think the idea of the 30-minute city will essentially come to town over the next 20 years, where we would start to find, through the development of things like mobility hubs or city hubs, as they're often called, a greater focus on what you do locally with the appropriate infrastructure to support it. And I'm particularly thinking about improved footpaths, improved space for micro-mobility like e-scooters, and generally a sense of greater community in terms of the types of services and some facilities that we provided locally. I also think that we will still want to continue to explore the world. And I'm hoping, as you have often said to me, that we'll be doing that in time with clean fuels, taking us on aircraft that are actually not contributing to CO2. Just to finish on that point, Rico, I think it's also important to mention that, you know, reducing CO2 is one thing, but we must be mindful of the negative sides of that challenge, and also the impact that may have when we start looking at some of the policies that have a negative impact on local air pollution. So I'm hoping by 2042, we're living in the world of renewables, where we haven't got to worry about dirty fuels, which are adding to the local air pollutants, especially particulate matter, and that we can start thinking about improving our mobility opportunities without worrying about the concern of climate change, but of course, recognizing that there still will be the big challenge. It's not going to go away in 20 years, in my view, of what we do about social exclusion and well-being.
Yeah, excellent. We like challenges. It gives us lots of things to do as academics, lots of research questions, but still very optimistic. So on that note, thank you, David, for your time today and for your leadership of the many years, and well done. Thank you.